Howdy folks, welcome back to the Steampunk Desperado channel. Today we're going on a strange journey. Our destination? The wild and mysterious interior of the Hollow Earth. What you say? What Hollow Earth? Well, a lot of people used to believe that. And the idea that the Earth is actually hollow with inhabitable lands and strange landscapes, plants, animals, intelligent races, it was a common idea as recently as the early 20th century, and a very dominant theme in the sci-fi of the Victorian era. This idea carried on into the early part of the 20th century through the pulp sci-fi, and it has, of course, fallen out of favor in mainstream science fiction because it's not very scientific. Yet it does appear in fantasy and, of course, steampunk. Where did people get this strange notion? Why did so many believe this idea as recently as a century ago? And why has it been such an enduring concept in fiction? To begin with, the idea of an underground world was an important part of many religions and cultures around the world. Starting with the West, Greeks and Norse, Hebrews, along with the Christians, the underworld is the land of the dead. In some cases, as with the Greeks, all of the dead go there. In other cases, it's the damned. Or for the Norse, it's the people who are not heroic, who didn't get to go to Valhalla. Hindu and Buddhist myths have a different take. They talk about magical kingdoms under the earth, which are the source of spiritual wisdom and sometimes earthly riches. There are utopian countries, Patala, Agartha, and Shambhala. And you may remember the Three Dog Night song, The Road to Shambhala. Finally, we have the Native Americans. Now, their take was also different. They saw the underground as the source of humanity. This is where people came from when the world was created. They crawled out of a cavern in the earth. Several have this same creation myth, which is very interesting. And I suppose these myths all made sense in their own way. First of all, we bury the dead in the ground, so the land of the dead is no doubt under the earth. Secondly, plants come up from the earth, so it's the source of life as well. So that's why it makes sense in the creation myth. Finally, it is the source of material wealth. And for the Eastern viewpoints, real wealth is spiritual. So it's kind of a connection. Under the world, there is this place with spiritual wealth and wisdom. So we had these ideas kicking about, but it probably wasn't until the 1600s that there were serious scientific theories about it. And I'm going to use this book. I found this book at a used bookstore. Turned out to be very cool, very enjoyable. The Hollow Earth by David Standish. And it was published in 2006 by the Capo Press. The blurb on the jacket describes it as a cultural history of what might exist under the Earth's surface, as reflected in mythology, religion, science, literature, and good old-fashioned crack pottery. I had to read that blurb because I love the word crack pottery. And there's not as much about myth in this book, but you can't do everything. It explores a lot of early Hollow Earth theories, the cults that rose out of them, and finding the great popularity of the idea in fiction. We'll start with Edmund Halley. He's the guy who gave his name to the comet. And he was a scientist and he had a lot of great ideas. And one of his ideas was involving why does the Earth's magnetic field exist and why does it kind of behave strangely? And he had this mathematical reason that said, well, the Earth should be made of concentric spheres, like the outer layer is 500 miles thick. There's another one inside. There's another surface down there, and with oceans and stuff, and they're all rotating differently, and that's what causes the magnetic field to exist and behave as it does. This also kind of jived with a lot of the religious theories of the time, and that was very important. The Creator created a orderly universe made of different layers, and it was all very logical. And of course, so the interior of the Earth had to be that way too. At this point, the author, David Standish, he jumps ahead to the 1800s. And a fellow named John Cleves Sims, he was an American, and like a lot of Americans, we have this fondness for kind of scammers and salesman types. Now, he at least purported to believe in the hollow earth, and he said, we have holes at the poles, and that's where you can go in and explore. And I don't think he originated this idea. I think this was around, but he was the one who was really stumping the speech circuit, giving all these talks. He was trying to get the government to fund an expedition to prove his point. And he, of course, was going to lead that expedition into the Arctic or Antarctic regions. Now, he never did convince the government. He died in his 40s. He probably exhausted himself being this advocate. But he had an acolyte named Jeremiah Reynolds who kind of took up the torch. And although he didn't get that much done either, he did provide inspiration for a young Edgar Allan Poe. And so we'll get back to him later. Now, there was another fellow, and there was a chapter about him in this book, which was very fascinating, an American named Cyrus Teed. In 1869, he claimed to have found the Philosopher's Stone. Now, if you've watched Harry Potter, you know what that means. And in this case, it wasn't so much about immortality, but about creating gold out of lead. And he had a spiritual awakening, and he said, I'm actually a prophet. My name is Koresh. No, not David Koresh. No relation to the Branch Davidians, but he preached this weird cosmology that said the sky is an illusion. We're actually on the inside of a sphere, not on the outside. And all this stuff, this is kind of this weird cloud or whatever inside. And that, in fact, was his motto. We live inside. He preached the equality of the sexes, saying that God is both male and female. And I kind of agree with that. If there's a supreme being, it would have to be both male and female. And a socialist economic system. And he founded this utopian colony in Florida, which didn't exactly endure very long. But he was not the only one, but possibly the most successful of the Hollow Earth cultists. So he has his whole chapter in the book. Now, I'm not going to get into any of the others, but only to say that this is an interesting book. Check it out. And also that it's a fascinating story. All the crazy ideas that people will believe in. Now, getting to the fiction, we're going to talk about Edgar Allan Poe. And he had an award-winning short story, 1833, called MS Found in a Bottle. And you can see that it was probably inspired by, some of these ideas, because the narrator's ship is sucked into a vortex, a maelstrom down by the South Pole. Well, of course, there's a hole in the earth. That's what's happening. And so that's what influenced a lot of his stories, including the novel narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym in 1838, which kind of drew heavily from those ideas. Now, there's all these terrible and horrible adventures that poor Arthur goes through, and they're, I believe, looking for the hole in the earth. Here's one I did recently reread just for this topic, Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne, 1864. And there are two English translations, 1871 and 77. Now, this time I read the latter, which is titled Journey into the Interior of the Earth, and both are available on Gutenberg.org as ebooks. So definitely get those. They're free. This book has been adapted so many times in film and other media, including major movies in 1959, 1989, and 2008, which was a 3D movie starring Brendan Fraser. Kind of silly, but very enjoyable. At least I enjoyed it. And probably we're due for another reboot pretty soon. I mean, it's been, close to 20 years now. So the story, if you don't know it, involves a young student named Axel. He's in Hamburg, Germany, and his uncle is his landlord and employer, Professor Leidenbrock. And Leidenbrock discovers this manuscript by an ancient Norseman, and the Norseman says that he went into this volcano in Iceland and found the center of the earth. So naturally, Leidenbrock has to go and check it out. And Axel says, no, 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 it's undoubtedly a myth, and in fact, the earth gets hotter and hotter and will die. You know what most scientists say. Leidenbrock says, no, 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 I believe in the theories of Humphrey Davy, which is a real thing, a real British chemist who said, no, the Earth is not that hot inside. In fact, it's cooled off most of it, and he had a different explanation for volcanism. So they have this argument as they're traveling to Iceland. Of course, the professor went out. He's the elder after all. They hire this guy named Hans, and they proceed into the volcano and into this interior world. Now, it's kind of slow paced in that this first part takes up between a third and half of the book to actually get into the hollow earth. Except his writing is really good. I mean, it's very descriptive. I love the characters and the dialogue and so on. And he was a very, very good writer. And he tried to put as much real science and geology as he could, whatever was the state of the art at the time. They find out that no, Leidenbrock, the professor, was right. The Earth is not getting hotter as they're descending. And they have a lot of harrowing adventures. I mean, near death experiences, getting lost, almost starving to death, almost dying of thirst. But eventually they find there are, springs down there. There's an ocean, and there's plants and animals, and a race of giants. There's this weird light that's lighting everything up. And I think it's chemical, if I understand correctly. And so they don't stay. Like a lot of the Hollow Earth stories involve the explorers end up staying and they get involved in wars and all this stuff, and they take a sweetheart. But of course, in this case, Axel already has a sweetheart he's trying to get back to in Germany. So it's kind of like in and out. They see all these wonderful things, they have all these adventures, and they get back. I know that's a spoiler, but since it's a first person narration, you kind of figure that he survived, right? It's a good book. It's a very good book, and I very much enjoyed it. And it was pretty plausible at the time. It's funny because it reminded me of Arthur C. Clarke's 1973 novel Rendezvous with Rama, which has scientists from Earth traveling in a spaceship to this alien probe that's passing through the solar system. And it is going to be just around for a year or so as it passes through, and they have to explore the inside. So it's this habitat. It's got this world on the inside, like cylinder, which reminds me a lot of Cyrus Teed's world. It's got, a little ocean in there and so on. They can't find any living beings. I think there was like plants, but it was all machines running around in there, and they see all these wondrous things. But as in Verne's book, it raises more questions than answers, and thus it's a lot of that same feel. There were a lot more Hollow Earth novels at the time. In fact, the book lists 36, and among them, I've only read two, and one was uh, Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, which is one of the Oz books where she has adventures underground after I think she's chasing her kitten or something like that. And the other was The Adventures of Baron Trump. Yeah, it became popular suddenly because it just coincidentally, the lead character had the same name as the president's son. And it's kind of a weird satirical adventure that this young genius has. But there was like 30 some others that I'm not going to go into. Suffice it to say, there were a lot of Hollow Earth books in the Victorian era. Now, getting into the 20th century, there was another book that I did read, At the Earth's Core, Edgar Rice Burroughs. He's the dude who invented Tarzan. This one was published in 1914. The narrator is a guy named David Innes. It's another first-person narration. Innes is from a wealthy mining family, and they're underwriting this mining machine by this kind of crazy old inventor, Abner Perry. And it kind of goes haywire, and they keep going, and they keep going down, down, down. They can't control the machine. So he is with Perry, and David and Perry end up traveling 500 miles down and popping out into this subterranean world. Now, this is much like Edmund Halley's theory, coincidentally. And now they are on the inside of a sphere, much like Cyrus Teed theorized, and this is an interior world called Pellucidar. And there are oceans where the continents are supposed to be, and vice versa. And there's also a sun in the middle that never moves. We surmise that that's the molten core of the Earth. So in this case, they explore the world, but they're quickly taken prisoner by these people these strange people that live underneath. Now, there are humans there. They're much like us. They have heroic males and beautiful females. And of course, David falls in love with one of those females and has to try to rescue her, etc. And the people are enslaved by this cruel race of lizards. Yes, yes, intelligent lizards. And they have this overseer race of ape men. So the humans have to defeat both in order to become free. And of course, David, the ingenious American, he's going to do that. So it's that kind of Yankee ingenuity type story that we've come to know and love. And much like the John Carter of Mars books that Burroughs also wrote, but still enjoyable, as long as you can suspend your disbelief. I can't go into the 21st century without mentioning another 20th century writer, H.P. Lovecraft, At the Mountains of Madness, 1936. And this story is primarily about Antarctica, and like a lot of other stories, we find this mystical world in the very center at the South Pole. It's warmer for some reason, and down here is the ruins of a primordial city, and these have the signs of all these elder things that created this underground world, these monsters that live down there, and the Shoggoths and other things like that. It's very eerie and spooky, and there's these immense caverns down there. So there is an interior world, even though the story's more about the alien city. One more thing from the 20th century I'm going to mention. The 1947 Secret Diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Now, the Hollow Earth book didn't mention it. It did mention Byrd having said he went beyond the regions of the pole, which Hollow Earthers interpreted as meaning that he had gone inside, even though he never said so. So this was supposedly by his secretary, and saying that he actually saw this hole at the South Pole, and he landed and he talked to these people that were inside the Earth, and they told him that we were taking bad care of the Earth, we humans, and that we had to stop that, and we had to especially watch out for nuclear war because it was going to destroy us. And in 1947, it kind of makes sense. Of course, it was a hoax, and Byrd never acknowledged that there was anything real about this. But it's a fun story, and I'm glad that Mrs. Desperado had heard that, because I had not. We now venture into the 21st century, into the realm of modern fantasy and steampunk. Now, there are several books that came out with underground worlds about post-apocalyptic eras where people are surviving down there. And no, these are man-made caverns, and so I wouldn't include any of those. I would talk, though, about a particular steampunk called The Court of the Air by Stephen Hunt, 2007. It's the first in this series about this fantasy nation called Jackals, which is a lot like Victorian Britain. So it involves these two orphans, Molly and Oliver, both teenagers, and they have these psychic powers from the Fae, kind of the fairy people, and they are being pursued by these evil conspirators who want to kill them. They have the power to stop their evil plans. They flee separately. And Molly goes underground with her friends, the Steam Men, which is this race of robots, which is very cool. They have a king and all that stuff, and very Oz-like in its feel. They go underneath. There's this underground world where this race of cruel aliens once ruled human beings during the Ice Age, and they were usurped, but their cruel, vicious gods still exist, and some of the bad guys in the book are trying to bring them back. But anyway, there's this whole world down there, so that is definitely a Hollow Earth book. Now, I did talk about Stephen Hunt's works earlier, kind of making fun of his writing style, and it was unfair because that was his very first two books. Since then, he's much matured, and this is a much better book, very complex and fascinating fantasy world he has created here, and I do recommend it, though it's a little long. I also have to mention a fantasy by one of my favorite writers, Aaron Morgenstern, who wrote The Night Circus, a wonderful, wonderful story, kind of a steampunk. It is one of my ultimate favorites, but this one was the next book called The Starless Sea, and it was published in 2019, and it's totally separate and different. There's a guy named Zachary Rollins. He's a grad student in Vermont, and he finds this book that seems to be talking about his own life in the past tense. He's very curious, so he goes in search of answers. He ends up in New York City at this secret club, and somehow he gets in and he finds this hidden door, and he goes into this underground world where they have this vast ocean, and he's traveling on a boat down there. That's the Starless Sea, and meets all these weird people and has these strange adventures. Again, kind of Oz-like. And I think it's like Oz, it's like a metaphor. It's like a spiritual journey. Not as good as the Night Circus, but still entertaining. One more, though. One more. This is an anime. Of course, because I love anime, and don't we all? This is based on a manga by Akihito Tsukushi, published by Takashobo in 2012 to the present. And I haven't read the manga. I don't read much manga, but I did watch the anime, 2 seasons, 2017, 2022. The hero is a young girl named Riko. She is spunky, she is intelligent, and you can't help but love her. She is trying to find her mother who's been lost down in the abyss. And that's a giant hole that goes down into the interior of the earth. And it's much like these other stories, in that there's all these weird creatures down there, and there's this weird source of light somehow you can see down there, and there's this alien tech. That's why people go down there to retrieve these technological devices, and that's what her mother was doing when she got lost. So anyway, Rico goes down there, and she knows it's going to be dangerous. She takes a friend, a cyborg robot boy named Reg, and they are kind of lowering themselves down on a rope, and it's this weird adventure, very strange, very disturbing in a lot of ways, but nonetheless one of the most imaginative and visually stunning animes I've ever seen. I recommend it with qualifications, not for young children, certainly not, even though they have a pair of young protagonists. If any of you out there know of any other Hollow Earth type stories in the modern times, please let me know in the comments, because I'd be interested to check them out. I think there are 2 reasons that the Hollow Earth idea was so powerful in the Victorian era and continued on through the 20th century, etc. First, because they were explorers. You know, the British and the Americans, to maybe a lesser extent, loved to explore around the world and find places they could exploit. And now they were running out of New World to explore. It's pretty much knew where everything was. I mean, they'd even discovered Antarctica, and they had a pretty good idea that it was all ice. And so writers were writing about all these fantasy worlds that would extend the age of exploration. You know, if we can go underground and see these new worlds, that would be fantastic. Secondly, and related to that, is the idea that they're kind of bringing back what's lost, because a lot of these underground worlds, they have like prehistoric creatures, like were in Verne's novel. There's like plesiosaurs and stuff, mammoths, and in many cases there are kind of primitive cultures, much like the Maya or the Egyptians and whatnot. And it's something that we wish that these things were still around, that we could see them, that we could check them out, that we could learn more about them. And it's sad that they're gone. So I see that as the secondary reason. And so it kind of taps into that need for people to have more to explore and to learn. And even now, when we know that the planets are so inhospitable, and even the oceans are a frontier, but that's also very dangerous. Think about those people that died in the submarine that was looking for the remains of the Titanic. And so this gives us an idea of a not quite so harsh world where we could go and explore and find new things and meet new people. So that's why I think we still talk about this and we still enjoy these stories, even though we see them as, you know, very fantastical, very fantasy-like. So thank you for going on my fascinating journey, however brief, to the interior of the Hollow Earth. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Please also like and subscribe, and check out my works on Amazon. Links are in the description. For now, this is Steampunk Desperado saying adios amigos from the Steampunk Desperado channel, where the past meets the future and the present is extraordinary.